All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Left Flank Socialist Sabbath. I am Leftist Lorax, and I'm joined here with Mr. Dick the Warlock.
What up? Welcome. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. And I just want to take a moment and, Alice Trebek died today, so let's take a moment and raise a glass
To a real one.
to a real one. Fuck cancer.
For reals.
All right, so you guys know the drill who have been here the last couple of weeks. This is Socialist Sabbath. This is episode 3 and part 2 of K-Popkin. Conquest, the bread book, as we like to call it. The Conquest of Bread. Finished off, and we'll do a quick recap of last week before we go on to this week's part. But this is an episode, if you are new here to Socialist Sabbath, we do talk about, we read theory and we talk about it. And that way we can apply the praxis to today's world and what we're doing in our society as far as Bolshevik brunch goes, I guess. It's a good day. It's raining here in San Diego, so finally get a little reprieve from the wildfires.
Thanks for that sub, Shot Rob.
Oh, thanks for the sub.
Cheers.
Hell yeah. Yes. So any new followers, again, we are left flank. We're a bunch of veterans. We're on the left, so we're going to read some theory to you. But the thing is, so the way Socialist Sabbath works is we don't read the whole book. I've gone through it throughout the week, highlighted, made notes, and we're going to talk about certain points. And so last week we did finish off the first 50 pages up to chapter 9, I believe, of Conquest of Bread. And we talked about the failures of capitalism, the abolishing of capital in its entirety, the seizing of all means of production, including warehouses, clothing, houses, all private property, to be able to give every single person, the community, a will to live, or the right to live. Every single person has a right to clothes, food, water, shelter, education, work. And then if we finished off on housing, dwellings. So the way it works was people were surveying the dwellings, housing every person into empty houses. But if a family does happen to live in a house already that's adequate for them, they're not going to be taken out of their house. Now, we're going to talk about the need for luxury is where we start off today. So one of the questions we got last week was, well, what about people who want nice things? After the revolution comes and we feed everyone and we clothe everyone, we house everyone. What about the want for nice things? What the luxuries, right? After all basic needs, because humankind in its entirety wants to enjoy life.
Some of that canned champagne.
Yes,
Canned champagne socialism.
Yes. Champagne and beers. Miller High Life. Sponsored by Miller High Life.
Yes. Under socialism, there will be no champagne, only the champagne of beers.
Best part of socialism is more long, boozy nights with your friends. And by the way, socialism isn't just when the government does stuff, just in case you're wondering.
Yeah, and it's not anything you don't like if you're a chud either.
What channel is this?
We're getting this question already? We just covered this, Sinful Echo. We're a bunch of lefty veterans. We're sorry about the imperialism. We're trying to make up for it. Learn some theory with us.
Yes. Reading some theory, talking about it. Actually, there's not a lot of, if you look up like podcasts for Conquest of Bread, there's not a lot out there. I think there's one that's like 45 minutes where they go through it, but
we're groundbreakers in so many ways.
And this is just, yeah, we are. Well, let's dive right in, actually. I've got my coffee and my water and my beer, so we're set. So we're on chapter 9. As I said, if you missed last week, sorry. You can definitely pick up this book anywhere, though. It's online, Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin. Kropotkin is a German theorist, political theorist. This book was written in 1892, so keep that in mind. He was from old Russian nobility, but decided at the age of 30 to throw his lot in the social rebels, not only of his own country, but in the entire world. So he did travel to the United States. He traveled across the world to try to push this message. And he actually criticizes Marx a lot in this book, more so because he's anti-collectivist. And there's an entire chapter on the problems with collectivism. And that's in this part. So it's actually really interesting. So let's go into the need for luxury. So as we talked about, housing, food, shelter, food, and clothing has been covered. So now we go into agriculture, the supply chain of a communist society. And this is in the sense that once one city becomes a commune, like the Paris Commune in the 1800s, other cities will join, and it becomes more of a support from commune to commune, without money and uh, without any sort of government. It's anarcho-communist. So, as soon as the material wants are satisfied, other needs, which generally speaking may be described of an artistic character, will thrust themselves forward. These needs are the greatest variety. They vary with each and every individual, and the more society is civilized, the more individuality be developed, and the more will desires be varied. And then he goes on, no doubt nowadays when hundreds of thousands and thousands of human beings are in need of bread, coal, clothing, shelter, luxury is a crime. To satisfy it, the worker's child must go without bread. So this he calls back into when you are working for capital, you're actually sacrificing a lot in order to achieve certain things. Like we see this in exact analogy today with Republican reps saying, oh, well, you bought an iPhone, you can't be poor, right? How'd you do that? And this is what he's arguing against. And so we're seeing these same arguments by the capitalists to say that, oh, well, you can't be very poor if you own something that's almost mandatory at this point in our society.
You critique society, yet you decide to live in one. Curious.
Mm-hmm.
Curious.
Very curious. All right. So he kind of goes on. Everybody does not need a telescope because even if learning were general, there are people who prefer examine things through a microscope to studying the starry heavens. Some like statues, some like pictures. A particular individual has no other ambition than to possess a good piano, while another is pleased with an accordion. So it talks about just like individual needs of wants for luxury. And once all needs are satisfied, all your needs are satisfied, then the wants come in. So we shall, in a few words, explain how man can contrive to satisfy all his intellectual and artistic needs. We've already mentioned that by working 4 or 5 hours a day until the age of 45 or 50, man can easily produce all that is necessary to guarantee comfort in society. So this is a callback to the last chapter, actually, where he talks about the workflow. So when you are working in a capitalist system, you're working for a high dollar in the production. So that way, if there's no money as the sense of reasoning, then you have just production for society, opposed to earning $1 and working extra wages or extra hours on low wages. And he talks about the slave wages in this part, but yeah. But the day's work of a man accustomed to toil does not consist of 5 hours. It is a 10-hour day for 300 days a year, well, in our case, like 364, and lasts all his life. Of course, when a man is harnessed to a machine, his health is soon undetermined and his intelligence is blunted. When man has the possibility of varying occupations, and especially of alternating manual and intellectual work, he can remain occupied without fatigue, and even with pleasure for 10 to 12 hours a day. Consequently, the man who will have done the 4 or 5 hours of manual work that are necessary for his existence will have before him 5 or 6 hours, which he will seek to employ according to his taste. These 5 or 6 hours a day will fully enable him to procure for himself, if he associates with others, all he wishes for, in addition to the necessities guaranteed to all. He will discharge first his task in the field, the factory, and so on, which he owes to society as his contribution to the general production. And he will employ the second half of his day, his week, his year to satisfy the artistic, scientific needs and his hobbies. So that's the argument we see that, under communism, there's no growth. There's no want to grow scientifically or artistically or culturally in a way that would satisfy people. But humanity has an inherent want to grow. I mean, we see this in the early Soviet Union, 1917 to 1930. They did make abortion legal across the nation. They started advancing scientifically in society. But then, the perils of war and fucking Stalin came in 1930. All right. And actually, this book does a really good job of like kind of predicting how the USSR failed after the People's Revolution. So, science literature must be for the people. Literature, science, and art must be cultivated by free men. Only on this condition will they succeed in emancipating themselves from the yoke of the state, of capital, and of the bourgeoisie mediocrity which stifles them. So it's just another argument that when capital is involved, it stifles man's work.
And I would add there too that you could look at the art world right now directly and see what they value and how the market works for art and how it gets promoted and raised, and it is entirely corrupted by capitalism. Like, it is basically a series of forces which take any piece of art, the Oscars, Academy Awards. The only way you can win an Academy Award is if you have a big production company which is actually supporting and sending your screeners out to all of the members of the Academy. They're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to promote your movie for even a possible nomination. That's the only way that you can. It's not the best pieces of art that are awarded these kind of things, or even the ones that, like paintings or poems or something, that fetch the highest price. It is about who can market themselves appropriately, and capital injects itself. Yeah, the Met Gala.
We talked about this with like Broadway, right? How they make Broadway purely for capital, opposed to just the arts. Just the idea that it can bring joy to society, opposed to paying $500 a ticket, where you have a certain class structure that can afford to go see it, or even just like paying $30 for fucking Apple TV to watch it.
Yeah, if we talked about this on our Patreon episode about Hamilton, if Broadway were nationalized, Hamilton wouldn't suck ass. It'd be a critique of Alexander Hamilton and the deeply, deeply flawed character that he was.
My dog's got the zoomies.
Rosa, Ms. Luxembourg's.
Yeah, she's got the zoomies. It's raining and she wants to go out, of course.
Poor girl.
Is it a dream to conceive a society in which, all having become producers, all having received an education that enables them to cultivate science or art, and all having leisure to do so, men would combine to publish the works of their choice by contributing each his share of manual work? We have already hundreds of learned literary and other societies of learning and associated for the purpose of publishing their works. The authors who limited number of copies are not for sale. They are sent gratis to all quarters of the globe, to other societies cultivating the same branches of learning. Yeah, she's just hanging out.
I love that.
This member of the society may insert it in its review a one-page note summarizing his observations. Another may publish therein an extensive work, the results of long years of study, while others will confine themselves to consulting the review as a starting point for further research. It does not matter. All these authors and readers are associated for the production of works in which all of them take an interest. So this is the argument of how art is stifled through capital, but it can be done. Like, instead of just specific markets for your works, if you do write a book, it just gets sent everywhere across the globe, so everyone can read it or have the option to read it. Or if you write one-page it gives everyone an option and a free voice to send their work without having the need for capital to be able to buy the necessary things in life, like food, shelter, water.
Agreed.
Yes. And this goes into patents, talks about science, talks about how vaccines and how we have treated medical ideology as capital. So
someone actually real quick, Lorax, in the chat, Judas313 points out, it's the same attitude that leads to degrees of higher education in non-STEM fields being stigmatized as useless. Like, oh, what are you going to do with your humanities gender studies degree? But then you end up with a bunch of STEM lords who are literally like creating algorithms that's like, let me detect if you're gay or not.
Yes.
Like, that was a thing that happened. Look it up. They were like, let's do a scan of people's faces. Let's literally create a gaydar. And like STEM lords don't understand why that's a fucking bad idea. That's why you're supposed to take humanities in college, so you can understand empathy for other humans and not just binary.
Yes.
And some appreciation for things outside of yourself and the efficiency and utility of them. Yeah, facial recognition tech, exactly.
Yeah. And so if a lot of this is driven by just the market of capital, I mean, I've said it before, but if there's no private property, there's no crime. But, it's just, um, and he goes really in depth. I really go like Kropotkin more than I like Marx, just because he really talks about post-revolutionary work and the necessity for everyone to be able to contribute to society. If you are willingly not contributing to society, we're still going to keep your needs because every person has a right to live. But if you can't work, you can't work, and that sucks. And the society will have to judge you in itself. The commune will have to judge you in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But what are we to do to alter the conditions that everybody is convinced are bad? Patents have been tried, and we know with what results. The inventor sells his patent for a few pounds, and the man who has only lent the capital pockets the enormous profits, often resulting from the invention. Besides, patents isolate the inventor. They compel him to keep secret his researches, which therefore end in failure. Whereas the simplest suggestion coming from a brain less absorbed in the fundamental idea sometimes suffices to fertilize the invention and make it practical. Like all state control, patents hamper the progress of industry. Thought being incapable of being patented, patents are crying injustice in theory, and in practice they result in one of the great obstacles to the rapid development of invention, as we just talked about. But it's amazing that this book was written in 1892. He just basically he fucking called it.
Yeah, it's amazing how these leftist thinkers have really actually predicted the commodification of every interaction we have as humans, and not even interaction, every piece of expression, every piece of art must be a commodity. It must be broken down to stem lords, ones and zeros. Otherwise, it does not have any value. You can't quantify its value in society.
There should be no such thing as a starving artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that famous video of, I always think about this when we talk about stuff like this, is the famous video of Bernie, which the Chuds use against him, where he's praising the art in the beautiful Soviet subway stations. Because he went to Soviet Russia on his honeymoon. He's a damn commie. Like the Chuds like to say. But there's a great video where he's talking about him and his wife are talking about they have this beautiful artwork, But then they cut out the part where he's also very critical of some of the conditions people actually are living under in that society as well.
Yes.
But he talks about there is a genuine government investment in the arts, and it is expressed in the public transit system. When you are it's provided to you, that is actually invested in. It's beautiful and functional. You can have both.
And the thing is, Kropotkin really argues against the state. He's a complete anarchist communist, hates the state, thinks the state stifles anything. And he goes into detail about this, especially with railroads, and how you don't need the state for railroads. You don't need the state for trade. You don't need the state at all to provide when humans provide for other humans without the idea of needing capital. Only with capital you need a state to regulate. And that's what he talks about. And mind you, and I'm going to tell you, I don't have a degree in this, just reading, so you don't have to. Can we talk about it?
Me either. My degree is in Middle Eastern Studies.
We also
useless humanities degree.
And we also say, in the first part, it was a lot about just seizing everything, seizing malls, seizing clothing, not giving away your clothing and putting it in a pile so everyone can take it. It's seizing things to meet everyone's needs, seizing housing. So we are not promoting a real, actual violent revolution. We're just reading a book.
It's theory. It's all hypothetical.
Theory.
It's all in Minecraft.
Yes, it's all in Minecraft. Yeah, we do an earlier show on Sundays for Socialist Sabbath. just so we can talk about this. We want to bring a little bit more substance. We can shitpost and we can talk about news all day, but
Also, Ms. Parakeet asks, where does the distinction between state and people helping each other exist in Kropotkin's theory?
we get into this more in agreeable work in his chapter 10, and then chapter 11 is free agreement. And he talks about the lack of need for state. And he talks about the lack of need for state throughout this, and just the man's in a want to help others and want to contribute to society, and how things don't get stifled just because there's no state pushing it, right? So, I mean, he talks about like how feudalism took advantage of peasants, and how they bought the land and then they taxed them. And if you have farmers who aren't being taxed, and there are no state officials telling them how they should farm or what they should do, except their neighbors saying, hey, we need this farm, they're not over farming for capital. They're farming straight to the capacity of the commune.
So it helps defeat the tragedy of the commons, so to speak, that you will just mine the earth for every nutrient and resource that it has until it dies, because there isn't a coherent collective effort to prevent it from being used that way, like capital incentivizes.
Yeah.
Like overfishing of the ocean, for example.
And I'll just say this is the second half of this book, so a lot of this stuff is tackled right away. In the abolishment of state, and once one city rises up, the next city will rise up, and then eventually you have a supply chain from one city to another, just based without government. But he also talks about, what if there's blockades? What if one person decides they don't want that trade and they try to block it? He kind of tackles that too. He has an entire chapter on objections, which is probably my favorite chapter of this book, just to how to tackle people's questions, like, oh, well, if there's no money, will people will want to work?
Nice.
So, yeah. So this is just to finish up this chapter. The same will be done as regards all pleasures not compromised in the necessaries of life. He who wishes for a grand piano will enter the Association of Musical Instrument Makers, and by giving the association part of his half-day's leisure, he will soon possess the piano of his dreams. If he is fond of astronomical studies, he will join the Association of Astronomers, with its philosophers, its observers, its calculators, with its artists and astronomical instruments, its scientists and amateurs. He will have the telescope he desires by taking his share of the associated work, for it is especially the rough work that is needed in an astronomical observatory. Bricklayers, carpenters, founders, mechanics' work, and the last touch being given to the instrument of precision by the artist. All right.
I like that.
Yeah, that's the needs for associations. And that's just, you create this association so that way if you're done with your 4 hours of labor throughout that day to help the commune, you go over to your friends with the Astronomers Association and work on building your telescope for yourself.
Yeah, you build some telescopes and you get one. Judas is asking which chapter we're on currently, just as an update.
Oh, we're on now agreeable work, which is chapter 10.
Chapter 10.
Now, I didn't get a lot out of this chapter, honestly. It was very much about domestic work at home. And this talks about how, we shouldn't define roles as like a woman at home just works and make her life harder with the community. We actually create things to make their life easier. If you are raising a family, you are able to work less at home and be able to take care of your family. And then I only got really one quote out of this. It will come. As we have said, things are already improving. Only let us fully understand that a revolution intoxicated with the beautiful words liberty, equality, solidarity would not be a revolution if it maintained slavery at home. half humanity subjected to the slavery of the hearth would still have to rebel against the other half. So if you're still about, you know, that trad life, we aren't with it.
Revolutionary trad wives. Abby Shapiro's of the world rise up.
Oh man, international audiences are always allowed. Come on.
Oh yeah, come on. Like what were
Yeah,
you saying?
please.
You saying earlier, Lorax? Like 1/3 of our followers are French.
Yeah, we have like 20% of our followers are French. But yeah, more. Yes, Mexican followers are definitely allowed. I would actually like to dive deep into like uh, Latin communism, like more like Che and
Fuck yeah.
Fidel. Yeah.
I got the Guerrilla Handbook
Oh, you do?
that Che wrote. Yeah, I have it.
Oh, hell yeah.
I bought it years ago before I was even a leftist. I just loved Che. I think it was after I watched the Benicio del Toro movie, the 2-parter on Che, which is very good. I liked it a lot. Soderbergh made it, I think.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point. Abolishing gender roles would benefit all. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, because it would open up the ability for everyone to do all of those jobs we were talking about earlier. If the trad wife isn't chained to the hearth, as Kropotkin refers to it, she can go be an astrologer at the Astrologers Association if she wants as well.
Yeah. Yeah. AMLO is in charge of Mexico, but right now, like, it's interesting. We'll see how that all works out. I like AMLO a lot, but still borders the United States, which is always a dangerous thing. So the next chapter is chapter 11, free agreement. Accustomed we are by hereditary prejudice and our unsound education and training to represent ourselves the beneficial hand of government, legislation, magistracy everywhere. We have come to believe that man would tear his fellow man to pieces like a wild beast the day the police took his eye off him. The absolute chaos would come about if authority were overthrown during a revolution. And with our eyes shut, we pass by thousands and thousands of human groupings which form themselves freely without any intervention of law and attain results infinitely superior to those achieved under government tutelage. So this talks about how the argument of like, oh, everyone just goes to shit if there's no cops in government. That's not true, actually. There's plenty of instances across the world and in history that have been not been governed, but been able to survive as a community.
Well, it's funny because we're having that argument right now, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Like every chud thinks that like now that Biden's been elected, the police are immediately defunded, even though he hasn't even been sworn in. Like, and you see the NYPD cops literally crying, just believing that their jobs will be abolished overnight. But as Kropotkin says, it is very unlikely that society falls apart if the cops aren't there. In fact, there's plenty of examples where there was like the complete collapse of society, or like a near collapse of society. For example, like Sebastian Junger actually has a great couple chapters on this in his book Tribe, because he's talking about how people will band together in times of need, especially like Sarajevo, the Blitz in England and stuff. They thought that everyone would just go apeshit and kill and murder and take each other's shit, but actually what they found was it created strong bonds between people.
Yeah. I mean, Ivory Blake, that's a really good point. I mean, abolishing gender roles is something I think most leftists can agree on, even like the Marxists, the collectivists, fucking, all over the board. The Luxemburgists.
Yes. Kill the gender role in your head first.
Yes. We come from the military, right? So we have a very interesting perspective on the toxic culture that the military broods. It's very traditional. It's very like women stay at home. It's gross.
It's masculine. It expects to beat the femininity out of women as well. Like the opposite of the gender role, because it's a masculine patriarchal institution. It's basically just an authoritarian patriarchy.
Yeah. So this is where he talks about he kind of goes into the no need for government and the free agreement. So if you open a daily paper, you find the pages entirely devoted to government transactions and to political jobbery. A man from another world reading it would believe that With the exception of the stock exchange transaction, nothing gets done in Europe save by order of some master. Sounds super familiar to current media, right? If you're to turn on CNN, it's all about the election. It's all about government. There's nothing about, Chris Hayes came out a few years ago. It was like, well, we tried to cover climate change, but it was bad in ratings.
Yeah, how about you cover something worthwhile? And then when people forget what CNN was before Trump, right? Before Trump, it was just pure sensationalism. It was the dumbest fucking takes hyped up. Like it was MH37 crashed, and we're looking for pings. We're looking for radar pings to find the black box.
Yeah.
It was hours and hours of that. It was boring as fuck. And they were just trying to sensationalize whatever they could instead of actually doing like real investigative journalism and shit.
Yes, exactly. So this is more just anti-government sentiment of just no need for it, right? So this immense network of railways, so he's talking about the railways in Europe. This immense network of railways connected together and the enormous traffic it has given rise to no doubt constitutes the most striking trait of the 19th century, and it is the result of free agreement. If somebody had foretold it 80 years ago, our grandfathers would have thought him idiotic or mad. They would have said, never will you be able to make the shareholders of 100 companies listen to reason. It is a utopia, a fairy tale. A central government with an iron dictator can alone enforce it. So remember, he's talking about like early 1800s, talking about how it was kind of more pro-authoritarian, pro-dictator mindset. And the most interesting thing this organization is that there is no European central government of railways. Nothing. No minister of railways, no dictator, not even a continental parliament, not even a directing committee. Everything is done by free agreement. So we ask the believers in the state, who pretend that we can never do without a central government, or it be only for regulating the traffic, we ask them. But how do European railways manage without them? How do they continue to convey millions of travelers and mountains of luggage across the continent? If companies owning railways have been able to agree, why should railway workers who would take possession of the railways not agree likewise? And if the Petersburg-Warsaw Company and that of the Paris-Belfort can act in harmony without giving themselves the luxury of common commander, why in the midst of our societies consisting of groups of free workers should we need a government?
Yeah, there's some good examples there, like I said, of how it works pretty well.
Yeah, but of course we see the railways in Europe completely privatized almost privatized at this point. But so continue. Argument against stake regulations, the reform idea. Everywhere the state is abdicating it and abandoning its holy functionings to private individuals, everywhere free organizations trespass on its domain, and yet the facts we have quoted give us only a glimpse of what free government has in store for us in the future when there will be no more state. He kind of, in this chapter, he talks about the Red Cross at the time, how it was volunteers devoting their time to help people. Red Cross now has been completely overrun by the nonprofit industrial complex, but we can talk about that another time. Actually, probably next week with Michelle. But yeah, it really goes into detail about that. Again, this is chapter 10, free agreement. Yeah, it talks about just the goodwill of society and how people just completely discard it because of the capital notion and the state.
Well, because right now because everything is commodified, that is one begets the other. Like if we had a society built around working towards the betterment of society as opposed to just generating capital and surplus capital for your employer, then we wouldn't have that desire to do so, right? Like it's a negative feedback loop, the capital generating machine. You
Yes.
think that that's the only way to survive, so you're literally incentivized to be a monster who just cares about making money and ignoring the ills of others because you don't think you can do anything to fix it. It's up to you to just look out for yourself.
Yeah, so we're getting into the objections chapter. Probably spend the most time on this one. because this is what we run into on a daily here. Of just last week, we had some guy trolling us like, "Oh, well, we need luxury, right? Like, what about this, that?" The other night was like, "Oh, well, people won't work if there's no money, right? There's no incentive." By the way, if you're just joining us, Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin,
AKA the conquest of canned bread that we like to call
yes,
it. We're big fans of canned bread.
aka Kropotkin, aka K-Popkin. So, objection. Should an authoritarian socialist society ever succeed in establishing itself, it could not last. General discontent would soon force it to break up or to reorganize itself on principles of liberty. So, it is not for us to answer the objections raised by authoritarian communism. We ourselves hold with them. Civilized nations have suffered too much in the long, hard struggle for the emancipation of the individual. To disown their past work and to tolerate a government that would make itself felt in the smallest details of a citizen's life, even if that government had no other aim than the good of the community. So, should an authoritarian socialist society ever succeed in establishing itself, it cannot last, general. So this is where he talks about the USSR. USSR turned into an authoritarian state. I mean, really, authoritarian state capitalism, but they called themselves communist after 1930. We're not going to go into detailed history, but that's what happened. Stalinism's stupid. Sorry. It is of an anarchist communist society we are about to speak, a society that recognizes the absolute liberty of the individual, that does not admit of any authority and make use of no compulsion to drive men to work. Limiting our studies to the economic side of the question, let us see if such a society composed of men as they are today, neither better nor worse, neither more nor less industrious, would have a chance of successful development. The objection is known. If the existence of each is guaranteed, and if the necessity of earning wages does not compel men to work, nobody will work. If every man will lay the burden of his work on another, if he is not forced to do it himself. Let us first note so that was the quote, right? And that's an objection. Let us first note the incredible levity with which the objection is raised, without even realizing that the real question raised by this objection is merely to know, on one hand, whether you effectively obtain by wage work the results that are said to be obtained, and on the other hand, whether voluntary work is not already now more productive than work stimulated by wages. A question which, to be dealt with properly, would require a serious study. But whereas in exact sciences men give their opinions on subjects infinitely less important and less complicated after serious research, after carefully collecting and analyzing facts on this question, they will pronounce judgment without appeal, resting satisfied with any one particular event, such as, for example, the one of success of some communist association in America. They act like the barrister who does not see in the counsel for the opposite side a representative of a cause, or an opinion contrary to his own, but a simple nuisance. An adversary in an oratorical debate, if he be lucky enough to find a repartee, does not otherwise care to justify his cause. Therefore, the study of this essential basis of all political economy, the study of the most favorable conditions for giving society greatest amount of useful product with the least waste of human energy, does not advance. People either limit themselves to repeating commonplace assertions, or else they pretend ignorance of our assertions. Lots of big words.
Yes.
But to put that in layman's terms, do you want to try?
I heard a witty repartee in there. Or repartee. There.
Conquest of bread.
Yeah. There's Less talk, more punching. Well, even if me and Lorax were in the same room together, which we're not, we're across the country from each other, I don't think we'd want to be punching each other. But I'm going to struggle to put that into layman's terms. I was struggling to keep up there, Lorax.
That's tough.
It was him trying to use the example of a lawyer trying to put himself in another person's shoes, correct, in order to make the argument, but the society not allowing for it. Is that my understanding of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the second half. I think the first half really is just like when someone says, well, if there's no money, then no one's going to work. You know, if
Mm-hmm.
someone else does it for you, you're not going to do it. And his main argument is, well, that's a flawed question
Mm-hmm.
because you've never had that. Or hold on, this is where it is. Incredible levity which this objection is raised, without even realizing that the real question raised by this objection is merely to know, on one hand, whether you effectively obtain wage work. The results are said to be obtained. So he's arguing that wage work, you actually don't get the same amount of results as you would if there was no wage work.
Mm-hmm.
If you were just to do things for society without the idea of this like money and luxury, you have the ability to actually do more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he does talk about just, you know, how the squabbling and how the inability with capitalism to see the other side.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's said by a lot of socialists is that capitalism is so intrusive and so ingrained in your psyche and through society and into your psyche that it will kill your imagination. Like you will actually fail to be able to imagine something better, which is why there's like so much like it's so rare to have a leader or a thinker who can cause you to break free of that and cause you to imagine a world that's better and realize it is possible. There is another way to do things.
Yep. So he does continue. What is most striking in this levity is that even in capitalist political economy, you already find a few writers compelled by facts to doubt the axiom put forth by the founders of their science, that the threat of hunger is man's best stimulant for productive work. They begin to perceive that in production, a certain collective element is introduced, which has been too much neglected up until now, to which and which might be more important than personal gain. The inferior quality of wage work, the terrible waste of human energy in modern agriculture and industrial labor, the ever growing quantity of pleasure seekers who shift their burden onto others' shoulders, the absence of a certain animation in production that is becoming more and more apparent. All this is beginning to preoccupy the economists of the classical school. Some of them ask themselves if they not got on the wrong track, if the imaginary evil being that was supposed to be tempted exclusively by a bait of lucre or wages really exists. This hearsay penetrates even into universities, is found in books or of orthodox economy. So we talk about economy just being fucking stupid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he rags on economists and it's great. This, but hold on, but this does not prevent a great many socialist reformers from remaining partisans of individual remuneration and defending the old citadel of wagedom, notwithstanding that it is being delivered over stone by stone to the assailants of its former defenders. So he's calling out other socialists for still wanting wages, but kind of making money off the backs of other workers.
Yeah, I mean there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. There's no ethical labor under capitalism, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean as as the son of a scab, I my father and I have had this conversation many times about like me being like, Dad, how could you do that? You know, like how could you, like those guys were fighting for better wages and stuff, and he was like, basically like I didn't even graduate high school. I had no better options, you know, like there was no way I could live outside of poverty without taking another man's job, basically. And it causes the man's got to eat, and he basically makes the opinion that like my dad makes the case that like you got to live a life that was somewhat comfortable and not in utter poverty because I did that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm a product of my father's unethical labor under capitalism, which was he was incentivized to do.
Yes. So I want to kind of bring back this. This is an important point that I brought up last week. I'm not sure if you saw it, Dick, but so this is post-revolution when we're trying to figure out what's going on, right?
After we seized everything.
Possibilists, collectivists, radicals, Jacobins, Blanquists, will be thrust together and waste time in wordy warfare. Just saying, Kropotkin, he predicted Twitter. Left Twitter.
Oh shit, you're right. Oh man, no, I didn't see that last week, but you're right. Yes, yes. The engaging in mind combat is praxis.
Yes.
Yes, dude. Let's fucking do mind combat with each other, and then not only will we do mind combat, but it will devolve into just the sharing of epic images on each other. Like who can be more epic, and just like it's a battle of symbols at a certain point.
Yes, and I just like want to address that. It's just the fact that like he talks about that and he says, no, we need to get to work. We need to start seizing things that are owned by the previous capitalists. Like go to the mall, seize H&M, get the clothes ready to go, and the warehouse where it's shipped from, so that way we can clothe every single person, and
Go
we
to
can make
Orange
sure.
Julius.
Yes,
Feed the homeless.
it talks about food. Take over the warehouses because there's going to be a period post-revolution of struggle, right? And he talks about health, like making sure every person has their needs to survive, and that includes healthcare. Seize the insulin warehouses, like make sure people who need insulin get insulin. Those kind of things are super important.
And don't kill the workers who know how to make the insulin, because we're going to need more than what's just there.
Yeah. Well, and it's all about like not, it's getting them on your side.
Yes.
It's
part of the revolution
he
will be
talks
winning
about
those
like
workers over.
And he talks about like once the revolution happens and the means are seized and we start this commune, the people who are rich who don't really do anything are going to be useless to society. They're not going to be able to put anything in. You don't even have to kill them. You just like once they're their servants is what they're called in this book. Like the people, their chefs, their house cleaners, everyone who takes care of them needs are met. They don't need to wage slave for their master, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
And Bonafide Arizonan says we need to seize the memes of production.
We do.
Yeah. So
we already do that.
We've already seized the memes of production. I hear that the left is getting better at comedy, and it is making the right nervous. That's what I heard.
So we're still on this. For it is remarkable that when economists wishing to celebrate the blessings of property show us how an unproductive, marshy, and stony soil is clothed with rich harvests when cultivated by the peasant proprietor, they in no wise prove their thesis in favor of private property by admitting that the only guarantee not to be robbed of their fruits of their labor is to possess the instruments of labor, which is true. The economists only prove that man really produces most when he works for freedom, when he has certain choice in his occupations, when he has no overseer to impede him, and lastly, when he sees his work bringing in a profit to him and to others who work like him, but bringing in little to idlers. Nothing else can be deducted from their argumentation, and this is what we maintain ourselves. It's like economists only argue that people do work for their own individual needs.
Mm-hmm.
And when capital's taken out, they're still working for their individual needs. They're still working because they're hungry. They're still working because they need a house. They're still working regardless.
Yeah. Humans, not only like, obviously we have the basic needs that we need to live, shelter, food, water, but we also crave purpose. Providing for a greater society, our individual needs, but each other's needs, people you care about's needs as well, or things you care about's needs, ideologies or something like astrology or astronomy. Sorry, or maybe not astrology. I'm not a big astrologer. Sorry for anyone in the chat.
I am.
Sorry to you, Lorax, for being an astrologist. But let's say you care about astronomy. Yes, you're going to actually invest your time and effort into the fucking telescope. Of course you will. You don't need to be paid to do that. It's something you give a shit about.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm just trying to catch up with the chat. Yeah.
Oh, we have a proud Scorpio in Bonafide, Arizona.
Hell yeah.
Who I know for a fact is not into astrology, you son of a bitch.
Fine. They can pretend on here. It's the internet, right?
Yes, yes, we're all pretending.
So this he got talks more about wage work. Wage work is serf work. It must not produce all that it could produce. And it is high time to disbelieve the legend which represents wagedom as the best incentive to productive work. If industry nowadays brings in 100 times more than it did the days of our grandfathers, it is due to the sudden awakening of physical and chemical sciences towards the end of the last century, not to the capitalist organization of wagedom in spite of that organization. So things happened without, you don't need wages to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just more and more arguments against wagedom. So this, he really hits Marx and like collectivism hard in this book. He really goes against Marx in a lot of ways, because Marx is, paid. He talks about it actually, like about to each of their needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how wages, money gets distributed, wealth or capital gets distributed throughout. But he hits that hard. 12 or 1,500 hours of work a year in one of the groups producing food, clothes, or houses, or employed in public sanitation, transport, and so on, is all we ask of you. For this moment of work, we guarantee you the free use of all these groups, all that these groups produce or will produce. But if not one of the thousands of groups of our federation will receive you, whatever be their motive, if you are absolutely incapable of producing anything useful, or if you refuse to do it, then live like an isolated man or like an invalid. If you are rich enough, if we are rich enough to give you the necessaries of life, we shall be delighted to give them to you. You are a man, and you have the right to live. Now he uses words in just reading from the book. Everyone has a right to live, and he argues that. But if you, as you wish, to live under special conditions and leave the ranks, it is more than probable that you will suffer for it in your daily relations with other citizens. You will be looked upon as a ghost of bourgeoisie society, unless some friends of yours, discovering you to be talent, kindly free you from all moral obligation towards society by doing all the necessary work for you.
Mm. Yeah, he's presenting the problem that the opposition would say to you. Like, if there's no incentive for me to work, why would I? If my needs will be met regardless. He's presenting that alternative to you. Like, well,
Yeah.
this person, actually, you have a right to live, but you may suffer in the eyes of the community that you are a part of.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I forgot one part. Same thing though. Therefore, we can only repeat what we have so often said concerning authority in general. To avoid a possible evil, you have recourse to means which in themselves are a greater evil, and become the source of those abuses that you wish to remedy. For do not forget that it is wagedom, the impossibility of living otherwise than by selling your labor, which has created the present capitalist system, whose vices you begin to recognize. Besides, this way of reasoning is merely a sophistical justification of the evils of the present system. Wagedom was not instituted to remove the disadvantages of communism. Its origin, like that of the state in private ownership, it is to be found elsewhere. It is born of slavery and serfdom imposed by force, and only wears a more modern garb. Thus, the argument in favor of wagedom is as valueless as those by which they seek to apologize for private property and the state.
Mm.
And then the next quote. Yeah.
I mean, I get what he's getting at here. I understand his arguments. I think that I'm naturally more inclined to the Marxist point of view here. I think his critiques are valid, but I guess I've internalized too much Marx and collectivism.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
No, and I'm not here to argue for or against. Really,
no.
I have my own. I have my own thoughts.
Of course,
sure. There are going to be issues with this. I think post-revolution, if it happens, post-uprising, right? I would want. I argued on Twitter the other day, last night actually. I was just like, you want leftists in city council, because if there is an uprising in your city, you want a leftist city council member to be like, hey, welcome to City Hall,
Yeah.
like Kashama Sawant did in Seattle, and supported the CHOP and supported the ideas of the revolution. You want that. So participating in electoral politics, it's very anti-communist, but in today's society, it might be a necessity. There are things you can write about this, and there's modern communist theory to be able to look at like today's society. This is very, this is going to be a different way. I'm just presenting the ideology, the theory, if you will, because this is what you're going to see like when you argue this stuff and when you talk about it in like your DSA, your PSL, your Socialist Alternative chapters.
Yeah.
When you do join a leftist org, and I hope you are all joining leftist organizations to get involved in your community, because that's praxis.
Can you make that face again, please? That's praxis.
That's praxis. Reading is just reading. Praxis is praxis. What's the praxis bell?
The old praxis bell.
What's the praxis bell?
Ding.
Praxis gong.
Normally we just have the racism and misogyny bell, but Erica and Marcus aren't here right now, so they're the ones usually doing racism and misogyny on each other.
Yeah. Sassy Lorax today.
Sassy Lorax.
It is. Yeah, because it's fuck Biden day. Now that he won, gave everyone a day to celebrate. Now it's time to get to work.
Yeah, we had our fun yesterday. It's time to do fucking leftist theory now.
Bolshevik brunch, everyone.
Yes, Socialist Sabbath on Bolshevik brunch on the Socialist Sabbath. That's what you're here for.
So here we go. It must also be said that if, thanks to their privileged position, rich people often perform absolutely useless or even harmful work in society, nevertheless, the ministers, heads of departments, factory owners, traders, bankers, etc., subject themselves for a number of hours every day to work which they find more or less tiresome, all preferring their hours of leisure to their obligatory work. And if in 9 cases out of 10 this work is harmful work, they find it nonetheless tiring for that. But it is precisely because of the middle class that put forth a great energy, even in doing harm, knowingly or not, and defending their privileged position, that they have succeeded in defeating the landed nobility, and that they continue the rule of the masses. If they were idlers, they would long since have ceased to exist and would have disappeared like the aristocracy. Can you say that?
Aristocracy.
Yes, aristocracy. In a society that would expect only 4 or 5 hours a day of useful, pleasant, and hygienic work, these same middle-class people would perform their tasks perfectly well, and they certainly would not put up the horrible conditions in which men toil nowadays without reforming them. If a Huxley, which is like a European person, spent only 5 hours in the sewers of London, rest assured that he would have found the means of making them as sanitary and as physiological laboratory. God damn, this book is hard to read, though. So this just talks about like how the rich, as I said, rich people are just going to kind of fall off of society, because if it wasn't for wage labor, they would be absolutely useless to society.
Yeah, like what does a landlord contribute to society? Nothing. Get a fucking real job. Owning property and exploiting other people for it is not a job. Fuck off.
Pull up your bootstraps.
Yes, pull up your bootstraps, and use them. Put on your boots, because you're going to need to run in Minecraft when the revolution comes.
Oh, and then it kind of goes into so the notes I have: rich people are useless. Education and education's bad, essentially. The current education system's bad. Do not you see that by your methods of teaching, framed by a ministry for 8 million scholars who represent 8 million different capacities. You only impose a system good for mediocrities, conceived by an average of mediocrities. Mediocrities.
Mediocrities, yeah.
Mhm. Your school becomes a university of laziness, as your prison is a university of crime. Make the school free, abolish your university grades, appeal to the volunteers of teaching, begin that way instead of making laws against laziness, which only serve to increase laziness.
Yeah, Miss Parakeet made a good point in the chat. It's credentialism. It's not education.
Mm-hmm.
It is purely you making yourself qualified and having the signifiers that you are prepared to generate more capital by doing a specific task. That's all. Learn to code, bro.
Yeah, so he just kind of talks about that. He really hammers home on the education system and how there is education in a communist society and how you educate based on the needs of society. And if you want to be educated in other things, there are ways to do it without the credentialism involved. So we have moved on to chapter 13, collectivist wage system. This is where he hammers Marx. So this is your argument here.
Uh-oh.
The anti-Marx argument. He mentions Marx twice, and it's to critique him throughout this entire book. The first time was, again, under the collectivist system, and this time is also under the collectivist system. But you should have all read Communist Manifesto. You don't have to read Das Kapital, but that's probably what sparked all of these writings.
Yeah, he is.
So
you don't get Kropotkin without Marx. I don't think. Something to critique, a base to work off of.
Yeah. Built up by the middle class to hold their own against royalty, sanctioning, and the same. Okay. While we see parliamentary rule breaking up, from all sides, criticism of this rule growing louder, not only of its results, but also of its principles. How is it that the revolutionary socialists defend a system already condemned to die? Built up by the middle classes to hold their own against royalty, sanctioning, and at the same time strengthening their sway over workers, parliamentary rule is preeminently a middle-class rule. The upholders of the system have never seriously maintained that a parliament or a municipal council represent a nation or a city. The most intelligent among them know that this is impossible. The middle classes have simply used the parliamentary system to raise a protecting barrier against their pretensions of royalty, without giving the people liberty. But gradually, as the people become conscious of their real interests and the variety of their interest is growing, the system can no longer work. Therefore, Democrats of all countries vainly imagine various palliatives. The referendum is tried and found to be a parliamentary utopias. In a word, they strive to find what is not to be found. And after each new experiment, they are bound to recognize that this was a failure, so that confidence in representative government vanishes more and more.
Well, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Mr. Lorax.
We're just I don't really have thoughts. I mean, it makes sense, though. I mean, it does make sense. The government only does protect the middle class, and that's middle and higher classes. We don't really have a middle class anymore. Right now, it's protecting the wealthiest. We don't have a representative government in the United States. We don't have a parliament, so he's talking about Western Europe in a sense. We have a set system, a failed system, post-democracy system, built on neoliberal hegemony. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he's right on this in a lot of ways of just how representative government has failed. Now, could you create a representative government that could work? He's arguing no. I don't know.
I mean, I get his meaning. I guess I'm more optimistic about the potential of collectivism than he is.
Yeah. Yeah, he goes, I mean, this is an entire chapter based collectivists in the wage system. So he talks about the labor checks, right? The checks based on the labor it is the same in the wage. It is the same with the wages system, because once the abolition of private property is proclaimed and the possession in common of all means of production is introduced, How can the wages system be maintained in any form? This is nevertheless what the collectivists are doing when they recommend the use of the labor checks as a mode of remuneration for labor accomplished for the great collectivist employer, the state. It is easy to understand why the English socialists, since the time of Robert Owen, came to the system of labor checks. They simply tried to make capital and labor agree. They repudiated the idea of laying lands on capitalist property by means of revolutionary measures.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. But I would say there are some things to be tried there that I think could work.
Yeah.
He's right about the constant, like, the attempt to smash capital and labor together and just make them work things out obviously doesn't work very well, because capital finds a way to beat labor, even if it's not directly at the negotiating table. They find a way to gut labor over a century, like has just happened to us here.
Yeah. And this is where he continues with, it amounts to this. Everybody works in a field, factory, school, hospital, etc. The working day is fixed by the state, which owns the land, the factories, the roads, etc. Every workday is paid for with a labor note, which is inscribed in these words, 8 hours of work. With this check, the worker can procure all sorts of merchandise in the stores owned by the state or by diverse corporations. The check is divisible, so that you can buy an hour's work worth of meat, 10 minutes worth of matches, and a half an hour of tobacco. After the collectivist revolution, instead of saying 2 pence worth of soap, we shall say 5 minutes worth of soap.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with him. You're just supplanting one currency for another there. That doesn't make any sense. I think that's dumb. Yeah, I don't. In a socialist society, I do not want to have writs of hourly labor to exchange for goods. You're just recreating. What's the the Rick and Morty saying? It's just like just slavery with more steps.
Yes.
It's just wage slavery with more steps.
Yes.
A different name.
Yep. And then he hits hard on if we have any French people in the chat, please sound off. Guesde?
Bonjour.
Bonjour. I was actually watching some French streamer last night. I was like, hey, because they were on the Ostpolitik subcategory. I was like, check them out.
Oh, nice.
Pretty rad.
Yeah, welcome
some
to
other
any Ostpolitik video viewers here.
For sure.
Welcome.
Yeah, we're trying to collab. Most collectivists, true to the distinction laid down by middle-class economists, and as Marx as well, between qualified work and simple work, tell us moreover that qualified or professional work must be paid at a certain quantity more than simple work. Thus, 1 hour's work of a doctor will have to be considered as equivalent as 2 or 3 hours work of a hospital nurse, or 3 or 5 hours work of a navvy. Professional or qualified work will be a multiple of simple work, says the collectivist Grunland, because this kind of work needs a more or less long apprenticeship. Some other collectivists, such as French Marxist Guede, do not make this distinction. They proclaim that equality of wages, the doctor, schoolmaster, and the professor will be paid in labor checks at the same rate as the navvy. 8 hours visiting the sick in the hospital will be worth the same as 8 hours spent in earthworks or else in mines and factories. And I think that's just what you just hit on. It's just like you're replacing one for another, and it's never going to be a way to replace things, because capital will always take over labor.
Yeah, and what he's describing is the tendency to recreate those structures of valuing one type of labor over another, even though they just might be different. Like, the apprenticeship requires more time, requires more study, therefore it is more valuable. But it's difficult in other ways.
And so he talks about this wage system, right? Let us own that this system appears to us simply unrealizable. Collectivists begin by proclaiming a revolutionary principle, the abolition of private property, and then they deny it no sooner then proclaimed by upholding an organization of production and consumption which originated in private property. And that's where he's just like, Marx, what's up? I got a bigger beard. It's just it's a beard growing contest.
Anarchist Santa Claus has come with his can of bread RPG.
Ooh, it's Anarch Christmas.
Is it?
I don't know. That's what.
Someone said that? Anarch Christmas.
No, I just did.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not funny.
Oh, Anarch Christmas. Okay, good.
Anarch Christmas.
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus. Yeah.
Got it. Santa Kropotkin.
All right, we're gonna move on. Dad.
Santa Claus
All right.
Sopkin.
This is just continued. Again, this is an interesting section. As to the employer who pays an engineer 20 times more than a laborer, it is simply due to personal interest. If an engineer can economize 4,000 a year, on the cost of production, the employer pays him 800. If the employer has a foreman who saves 400 on the work by cleverly sweating workmen, he gladly gives him 80 or $120 a year. He parts with an extra $40. He expects to gain 400 up by it, and this is the essence of the capitalist system. The same differences obtain among different manual trades. Let them therefore not talk to us of the cost of production, which raises the cost of skilled labor, and tell us that as a student who has gaily spent his youth in a university has a right to the wage 10 times greater than the son of a miner, who has grown pale in a mine since the age of 11, or that the weaver has a right to wage 3 or 4 more times greater than an agricultural laborer. The cost of teaching a weaver his work is not 4 times greater than the cost of teaching a peasant his. The weaver simply benefits by the advantages of the industry, reaps an international trade from countries that have as yet no industries, and in consequence of the privileges according to by all states to industries in preference to the tilling of soil. Nobody has ever calculated the cost of production of a producer, and if a noble loafer costs far more to society than a worker, it remains to be seen whether a robust day laborer does not cost more to society than a skilled artisan. When we have taken into account infant mortality among the poor, the ravages of anemia, and premature deaths.
I'm not sure I understand the point there. I'm going to need you to suss that one out for me, Lorax.
So he's just kind of saying that there shouldn't be no wage disparity in that sense. There should be no wages in period. He's arguing completely against wages. But when you do involve the wagedom that is brought up by a lot of Marxists, it totally just ignores like health. It ignores like premature birth deaths. It ignores a lot of like race irregularities and things like that. But you take wages away from that and you give the community like a reason to work for the community, you're kind of taking away that inability to see that in society.
Yeah,
and that's what I got out of that.
He's making a point about your surplus value, your surplus labor that you are creating. You're going to end up like making the argument again. You're going to recreate that under Marxism, and it will be exploited just in a different way.
Yes. That's pretty much it for that. I mean, there's a lot of anti-collectivism. The collectivists say, to each according to his deeds, or in other terms, according to his share of services rendered to society. They think it expedient to put this principle into practice as soon as the social revolution will have made all instruments of production of common property. But we think that if the social revolution had the misfortune of proclaiming such a principle, it would mean its necessary failure. It would mean leaving the social problem which past centuries have burdened us with unsolved. Curious.
Curious, indeed.
We are moving on. We do still live in society. Chapter 14. So, consumption and production. If you open the works of any economist, you will find that he begins with production, i.e. by the analysis of the means employed nowadays for the creation of wealth, division of labor, the factory, its machinery, the accumulation of capital. From Adam Smith to Marx, all have proceeded along those lines. Only in the latter parts of their books do they treat of consumption. That is to say, of the means resorted to in our present society to satisfy the needs of the individuals. And even there, they confine themselves to explaining how riches are divided among those who vie with one another for their possession. Perhaps you will say this is logical. Before satisfying needs, you must create the wherewithal to satisfy them. But before producing anything, you must not feel the need of it. Was it not necessary that first drove man to hunt, to raise cattle, to cultivate land, to make implements, and later on invent machinery? Is it not the study of the needs that should be that should govern production? To say the least, it would therefore be quite logical to begin by considering the needs and afterwards to discuss how production is and ought to be organized in order to satisfy those needs.
I'm gonna need your help here again, Lorax. There's a lot. There's a lot to unpack.
I know. Try reading this in a week.
I would need a month.
No, it's a lot. Actually, like 3 days because I started on Friday. No, this is. It just kind of says that from Marx to Adam Smith, they never really talk about the consumption needs, the needs of society in that sense. And it talks about how. So, to say the least, it would therefore be quite as logical to begin by considering the needs and afterwards discuss how production is. So it's basically, instead of doing production first, you work on the needs. You figure out the needs of every single person in your society, and then you produce based on those.
Forgive me if I missed this, but is he addressing like the ever-changing needs of society based on first of all, the difficulty of accounting for what those needs exactly are, the necessity to quantify human need, but also the expansion of population and stuff over time. Like, is he arguing that we need to break this down into some kind of code to make that happen?
Yeah, he does talk a lot about just like the science of all of this that needs to be thought of and studied too. So this is the first paragraph of this chapter, looking at society and its political organization from a different standpoint than that of all the authoritarian schools, for we start from a free individual to reach a free society. Instead of beginning by the state to come down to the individual, we follow the same method in economic question. We study the needs of the individuals and by the means to which to satisfy them. Before discussing production, exchange, taxation, government, and so on, at first sight, the difference may appear trifling, but in reality, it sets the canons of official political economy. So I think that kind of ties it a little bit more together.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess he is addressing that. I mean, he's saying, yes, we need to do that, but he's not saying exactly
how.
Yes. Yeah, that's like easier said than done kind of thing in my book,
So he then continues, this is precisely what we mean to do.
Don't worry, folks, we'll figure it out.
But as soon as we look at political economy from this point of view, it entirely changes its aspect. It ceases to be a simple description of facts and becomes a science. And we may define the science as the study of the needs of mankind and means of satisfying them with the least possible waste of human energy. It's true the name should be physiology of society. It constitutes a parallel science to the physiology of plants and animals, which is the study of the needs of plants and animals, and of the most advantageous ways of satisfying them. In these series of sociological sciences, the economy of human societies takes the place occupied in the series of biological sciences by the physiological of organic bodies.
Yeah, he's arguing for like a biology of economy, basically. Like, obviously he's very critical of economics, but his description of economics basically is the economy of human need as opposed to the economy of supply and demand that we currently have, right? So he's thinking about, Bootstrapology, says Bonafide Arizonan. How much does the human race need to pull itself up by its bootstraps? How does the human race pull itself up by its bootstraps?
And I think we have enough over the last 100 and something years since this book's been written. We have the data to be able to support this argument. That's where, in 1892, none of this was written. So even in his book Mutual Aid by Kropotkin, he spends the first quarter of the book talking about animals and plants, and talks about how they practice mutual aid without any. And maybe we'll read it, maybe we won't, but it's a good one. It talks about how we as humans need to stop looking as us as some sort of superior species when we do need to organize on mutual aid like animals do.
Yeah, because the counter argument to that is the Darwinistic survival of the fittest, but the Darwinism doesn't take into account the altruistic nature of many different pieces of flora and fauna, which will actually work to propagate each other and have a genuine community. There's a reason that the chimps pick bugs out of each other's hair. It's not just beneficial to them, it's beneficial to the community, which benefits them. Yeah, reject humanity, return to monkey. I wish we could.
And he does talk about just how there's no one out there really talking about this at that time. There's Marx brought up the failures of capitalism and how capitalism is dangerous because it does evolve, and it evolves with every year and the way things grow. We have automation now. We're not even addressing it. That's what Marx said was going to happen. What Marx didn't do was talk about post-revolutionary ideas and talk about where to go from there. He does talk about collectivism in a way, but he doesn't address any of those issues that might be it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest critique on Marx, and that's it, really.
Yeah. Well, Marx walks, so Kropotkin can run, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I mean, these are all we're gonna do Lenin next. That's a whole different, and then we're gonna do Luxembourg after that.
Luxembourg.
We're
gonna have to create some epic memes for that one. So epic.
So this one's just, it's a really short chapter, so I'm just reading most of it, but it's the division of labor. We're moving on to the next one. So we just passed consumption and production, and he argues that we just need more study on it, really, the fact that everyone's always looking at production, but no one's actually looking at consumption of what people need and the individual needs. And I've seen this argument, too. Someone posted, hey, you revolutionaries, what are you going to do about, people with disabilities who can't be part of the revolution? Are you going to continue giving them their health care that they need to survive? And I think Kropotkin actually talks about that in this book, and he talks about how, yes, we would need to seize all healthcare to be able to give you the ability to continue what you need to survive and live.
Because at the end of the day, that's what leftism is about. What are you going to do, leftists? Let the invalids die? No, that's literally what we're fighting for, is to value human life over your fucking shitty establishment that the hell world we currently live in. How about we value human dignity, the ability to live, for one, and the ability to live with dignity as well. How about that? That would be nice.
Yeah, this chapter just talks about the failure of the division of labor and how it only helps capitalists. And so I'll kind of just talk about it a little bit. So political economy has always confined itself to stating facts occurring in society and justifying them in the interest of the dominant class. Therefore, it pronounces itself in favor of the division of labor in industry. Having found it profitable to capitalists, it is set up as a principle. Look at the village smith, said Adam Smith, the father of modern political economy. If he has ever been accustomed to making nails, he will only succeed by hard toil, by forging 200 or 300 a day, and even then they will all be bad. But if the same smith has never made anything but nails, he will easily supply as many as 2,300 in a course of a day. And Adam Smith and Smith hastened to the conclusion: divide labor, specialize, go on specializing. Specialize, go on specializing. Let us have smiths who only know how to make heads or points of nails, and by this means we shall produce more. We shall grow rich. and he's just kind of he knocks Adam Smith more than he knocks Marx, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean that's where your gun should always be aimed. But I don't need a nail from the smith. I need a great sword for which to slay the dragon. Okay,
We need more guillotine production.
I need the smith to forge me a Damascus blade that can pierce the skull of of Smaug. Okay, it's not nails. Come on, that's boring shit. Give me some. Give me the good shit, man.
So this is where he kind of goes after most socialists. Thus, we see most socialists, even those who have not feared to point out the mistakes of economical science, justifying the division of labor, talk to them about the organization of work during the revolution, and they answered that the division of labor must be maintained. That if you sharpened pins before the revolution, you must go on sharpening them after. True, you will not have to work more than 5 hours a day, but you will have to sharpen pins all your life. While others will make designs for machines that will enable you to sharpen hundreds of millions of pins in your lifetime. And others, again, will be specialists in the higher branch of literature, science, and art, etc. You were born to sharpen pens, while Pasteur was born to invent the inoculation against anthrax. And the revolution will leave you both to your respective employments. Well, it is this horrible principle, so noxious to society, so brutalizing to the individual, source of so much harm, that we propose to discuss in its divers manifestations.
I'm just imagining the scene from the Matrix where like Morpheus is like, you know, red pill, blue pill, the classic scene, and he's like, it's a red pin and a blue pin, and either way you got to sharpen the fucking pin. It's like this way you have a pin and you work 8 hours a day. This way you sharpen this pin but you work 5 hours a day. Cool. That's basically what Kropotkin's arguing, right?
Yeah, and that's what he's like. He's just like, no, this is bullshit. If you want to work a different job and do something, but as long as it's going towards the community and society, then it's good. Do what you need to do. It doesn't have to be divided. It doesn't have to be because you are good at this, you are going to do this for the rest of your life. No, if you want to do something, if it's like, if you want to become a butcher, go become an apprentice for a butcher and like be able to provide meat for the community, or a farmer or agriculture, things like that.
Yeah, like I remember the classic line in Harold and Kumar where Kumar is like his parents are like, all our whole family is doctors because, you know, and the Indian people have a proclivity towards medicine, and he's like, just because you're hung like a moose doesn't mean you got to do porn, you know. Like just because you got the skills, you got the goods, doesn't mean that you should have to do a particular profession. Yeah, if going out there and pounding poon all day is not your thing, then hell, you can go sharpen pins. You should be able to. Shouldn't have to.
Yeah. So, and then he talks about like trade and how that creates the gap in the division of labor, and it only increases the division of labor. And he also talks about, you know, with the end, like the Industrial Revolution, creating a crushing blow to division of labor. And we're seeing that with automation. We're seeing division of labor just being crushed with automation, where we are seeing this today. Like, yeah, this is not far off.
The Industrial Revolution, like, definitely, obviously, terrible for division of labor, but with the digital revolution here, or like whatever you want to call it, the automated revolution, like you said, Lorax, is worse because what it's doing is actually breaking the tiny existence of social bonds that we have left from each other. Like the automation of the Uber driver who never meets a boss or a coworker, and just drives around all day, just picking people up and dropping people off for their cheap fares, without ever even discussing or knowing what the driver who may be driving right behind him all day is making or doing, or how they are treated, or what, you know, like those social bonds allow you to organize your labor, allow you, and this. Yeah, as things become more automated, we will continue to see the breakage of those bonds.
Yes. So moving on to the next chapter, decentralization of industry. So this is where he kind of goes into detail about trade and how imperialism has created trade, like how Europe or Britain overtook India and created the he talks about just like how all these countries have created this mass division of labor and centralized industry for everything, or yeah, decentralized.
They created the
So
East India Company.
yes, I mean, he talks a lot about countries and trading and how it just hurts the working class, right? We have already mentioned that should the revolution break out tomorrow in Paris, Lyon, or any other city, should the workers lay hands on factories, houses, banks, and present production would be completely revolutionized by this simple fact. International commerce will come to a standstill, so will the importation of foreign breadstuffs. I love how he says breadstuffs.
Canned bread. He's talking about canned bread. How else are you going to transport it? That shit ain't going to keep long. You got to put it in a can.
The circulation of commodities and the provision will be paralyzed. And then the city or territory in revolt will be compelled to provide for itself and to reorganize its production as to satisfy its own needs. If it fails to do so, it is death. If it succeeds, it will revolutionize the economic list or life of the country. And that's where you are forced to figure it out. Post-revolution, right? You're forced to figure out community farming. You're forced to figuring out co-ops. When there's no more state trade and they cut you off, the rest of the world, they're like, nope, how are you going to do that? Mutual aid, co-ops, things like that. So that's what he's talking about. And it's not very detailed. Like that's about it, really.
So he's skimp on the how once again. Hey, you'll need to figure it out. Otherwise, you will all die. So good luck.
No, he talks about, like, of course, there will not be. He actually wrote an entire book on agriculture and like community farming and learning how to farm and shit like that and how to do it as. Yeah.
A different tome.
I mean, he even says in the intro, he's like, this book should be read with fields, factories, and workshops, which is another Kropotkin book. Okay. So yeah,
fair enough. Yeah, he anticipated this criticism. He's like, you're gonna tell me, like, yeah, I know exactly how you're gonna do the farming. Here you go. Here's the whole book on it.
Well, he brings up like the Paris Commune and how like basically the state came down on them, though. Really, just like it wasn't them. They were doing fine. It was the state. It was Napoleon who crushed them.
Yeah, and the chop too. Same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The chop would have been just fine if like there was no state to crush them, right? Like they would relied on mutual aid and figured it out. But they didn't really have like agriculture. There was no farming. Like they did have the field, but it wasn't grass. It was astroturf. So you can't even. You need to repurpose that. Where are you going to get the grass? You can't import it, so you got to figure it out, right?
Yeah, and they were still like hooked to the infrastructure of the state too, through like water and stuff, electricity. That was all coming from outside of the chop, you know.
Yeah. Anyways. Yeah, so I mean, we'll see a variety of trades mutually cooperating of the spot of a globe and animated by revolution can do to feed, clothe, house, supply with all manners of luxuries millions of intelligent people. So he just talks about once that happens. In the first part of the book, he does argue about how if one city goes up, other cities might go up too. You know, and it's this mass uprising. He does rely heavily on a mass uprising, a mass revolution, which you can't, like, say LA goes up. LA people revolt. Do you think San Diego and San Francisco would go up next? Like, would they follow suit? We don't know. He's relying on yes.
Yeah.
You know, he's relying on every major city in the U.S. just like completely, complete revolution at the same time, or within like weeks, right? So like Seattle goes up, and then Portland, just throughout the coast, and reaches to Cincinnati. But you have different. I don't think that's possible in the United States. You just don't.
Yeah, but it doesn't work otherwise. Basically, his argument is the state will come down on you if it doesn't work that way, and I don't think he's wrong about that. But I am pessimistic about whether or not that could actually happen, like you said.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go too much into the next chapter, which is agriculture. He has a chapter on agriculture. It's 17. It would be impossible to quote here the massive facts on which we base our assertions. We are therefore obliged to refer our readers who want further information to another book, Fields, Factories, and Workshops. Above all, earnestly invite those who are interested in the question to read several excellent works published in France and elsewhere, and of which give a list of those at the close of this book. As to the inhabitants of large towns who have yet no real notion of what agriculture can be, we advise them to explore surrounding market gardens. They need but observe and question the market gardeners, and a new world will be open to them. So he's basically saying, hey, if you don't know how to do this, figure it out. Like, go learn. Go talk to gardeners. Talk to, like, if there's a, and here's my thing. If you have a community garden in your town, go talk to the people who run the community garden and figure out how they did it. Because, you know, if there's a plot of land that doesn't have a community garden, why not try to build it?
Yeah, I mean, those existing I mean, this is why anarchists are all about existing networks of mutual aid. Kropotkin like literally creates this concept or codifies it, right? Is because he's saying that like this revolution doesn't happen unless that infrastructure exists already, because people will be too afraid to do it otherwise. They're like, if the grocery store closes tomorrow, I die in a week. You know, I go hungry in a week at most.
Yeah.
Especially people who live in urban areas.
Yes. Exactly. So he goes on. We know in what a wretched condition Europe agriculture is. If the cultivator of the soil is not plundered by the landowner, he is robbed by the state. If the state taxes him moderately, the money lender enslaves him by means of promissory notes and soon turns him into a simple tenant of soil belonging in reality to a financial company. The landlord of the state and the banker thus plunders the cultivator by means of rent, taxes, and interest. The sum varies in each country, but it never fails below the quarter. Very often half the raw produce. In France and in Italy, agriculture has paid the state quite recently as much as 44% of the gross product. So he just kind of hits more on like how these systems have given so much away to capitalism. He goes really in depth into numbers here, and I'm not trying to do that. There's no way to compare it to current. Like there is, but I'm not going to try to do if inflation and population growth from 1992 to 2000. I'm not here for that. I'm not a professor.
Yeah, here's what you get for a pound of ears of corn in 1892. Let's do the inflation on that.
I mean, I could do the math, and I would if you hired me to a university in Europe and give me pay my trip. If you're watching in France,
This is like this reminds me, the capitalist methodology of doing this is, I don't know if The Economist still does this, but like currencies, this should be enough for you to discount the objective nature of capitalism outright, because in The Economist, currencies were so unreliable to actually determine like real genuine inflation or value in the country that the price of a Big Mac at the McDonald's in the country was a more reliable indicator of the monetary market than the actual currency itself, because it was so easily manipulated.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that doesn't tell you capitalism is broken, then I don't know what will.
One thing I do want to read, and I don't know if anyone who's watching would be down for this, but The Modern Monetary Theory by Stephanie Killian, I think, MMT. I know very little about MMT. I know MMT bros on Twitter are awful, but I do believe that there's a good argument for it, and it's also a new theory too. It's fairly new, and I think it's something that I don't know if anyone would be wanting to go over that.
Hell yeah, I would.
So this is what he did, right? He wrote down all this shit, and he's like, "Hey,
areas to be cultivated."
Yeah. So area makers. So he really does break down the map, and he's like, "This is what we could do." By the way, hey, he's pretty smart when it comes to like farming and shit. So for his time.
Yoo-Hoo Zippy says, you want to know the insane thing? I know astrologers who work with stock market investments economists have a lower rate of accuracy than them, apparently. Yes. Yes.
I believe that.
The stock market is astrology. Economics is astrology. It's a fake fucking pseudoscience. Like, the only way to make money in the stock market is to cheat. You literally have to manipulate the market or have information, do insider trading. It's the only way to make money. Otherwise, you're just guessing.
Yeah.
That is the only way. It does. There's literally no other way. You can't just predict to be like, oh, this product is going to skyrocket. So we're going to make money. No, you're just gambling. You're just gambling. It's not
Yeah.
anything different than putting $20 on the bills next week.
I had a coworker come up to me and was like, I kind of stopped doing stocks because I realized it was just gambling and I hate gambling. I was like, yeah, told you that like
Yes,
3 weeks ago.
it really is. That really is. I mean, there's an argument to be made that like things that aren't stonks, like bonds and shit and CD, like those type of things are a savings account. Isn't as much gambling. But the institutions that take that money from you and put them in the bond, they do gamble with them. They are
Yes.
like, you don't have a say in that either. And they are leveraged to the hilt. They are like leveraged at like 20 times their actual money in the bank. It's insane.
Yeah.
That's why 2008 happened.
Yes. Anyways, I'm going to continue this. We only have a couple more points. That's it. So this is actually the second to last.
Oh, good.
And we're done with Kropotkin. So we can move on to Lenin.
Sick.
All right. So he did that math, right? So the paragraph I'm going to read afterwards. If we suppose that only half the able-bodied adults, men and women, are willing to work at agriculture, we see that 70 million workdays must be divided among 1.2 million individuals, which gives us 58 workdays of 5 hours for each of these workers, with vegetables and fruit, and both for ordinary and even luxurious consumption. Today, a workman spends for the necessary food of his family generally less than what is necessary, at least 1/3 of his 300 work days a year, about 1,000 hours be it, instead of 290. So he argues when you take away the capital incentive, you actually produce more, or you can do a lot less work and still produce the amount. This is just the argument against like the 8-hour workday and the 40-hour work week that we can use today. Like even through reform, like you can actually get that. You can push those kind of things because no one works 8 hours in a day.
No.
You just don't, And if you are at work, you maybe like do 4 or 5 solid hours of work. And you can be just as productive. Sweden figured it out.
If anyone is doing a genuine 8 hours of work a day, you're a fucking sucker. Stop it. Like, go take a shit for an hour every day.
And your coworkers probably hate you because you do way too much work, and you're probably that person who does extra things that you don't have to. We have a few of those.
Yeah.
They're awful.
Yeah.
And everyone just like, why are you doing this? Like, you don't have to do this.
Like, there's an argument to be made that, like, you get purpose from your work. Like, do things at your job that, like, if you're going to be a wage slave, like a lot of us have to be to survive, then, do things that give you purpose and do things that you like. But, like, don't toil for 8 hours a day because you think that's the right thing to do. It is genuinely fine to steal from your employer via taking a nap when you're working from home. They'll be
Boss
fine.
makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I poop on company time.
Fuck yes, the meat.
Except if you work for Amazon, where you have to clock that shit, and that's just fucking awful.
Yeah, late stage capitalism requires you to wear a fucking diaper in a lot of cases, and we're all on track to do that. They are literally working on AI monitoring software for when you're working from home to determine how productive you are and incentivizing your productivity. We're going to have electrodes attached to our fucking nuggets that are going to zap us if we fall asleep at our desk at home.
Yeah.
It's going to be a requirement to have those little little laser beams installed just above you in your webcam. That's going to fucking give you a nice little shock if you don't get your shit together and be productive again.
All right, so we're going to finish this off. This is the callback to the beginning. Concluding statement. Of all the great days of the French Revolution, so Kropotkin brings up the French Revolution a lot in this book. In fact, he uses it for historical reference points a shit ton. In fact, in every chapter, you can find a French Revolution callback of just like, this is how they fucked up, essentially, and how they failed in their revolution because of that. It was successful, but he does talk about like the failures in it. So, of all the great days of the French Revolution, the most beautiful, the greatest, was the one on which delegates had come from all parts of France to Paris, worked all with the spade to plane the ground of the Champ de Mars, preparing it for the Fête of the Federation. The day France was united, animated by a new spirit, she had a vision of the future in the working in common of the soil. And it will again be by the working in common of the soil that the enfranchised societies will find their unity and will obliterate the hatred and opposition which has hitherto divided them. Henceforth, able to conceive solidarity, the immense power which increases man's energy and creative forces a hundredfold, the new society will march to the conquest of the future with all the vigor of youth. Ceasing to produce for unknown buyers and looking in the midst for needs and tastes to be satisfied, society will liberally assure the life and ease of each of its members, and as well as the moral satisfaction which work give when freely chosen and freely accomplished, and the joy of living without encroaching on the life of others. Inspired by a new daring, born of the feeling of solidarity, all will march together the conquest of the high joys of knowledge and artistic creation. A society that thus inspired will fear neither dissensions within nor enemies without. To the coalitions of the past, it will oppose a new harmony, the initiative of each and all, the daring which springs from the awakening of the people's genius. Before such an irresistible force, conspiring kings will be powerless. Nothing will remain for them but to blow before it, to harness themselves to the chariot of humanity, rolling towards new horizons opened up by the social revolution.
Harnessing yourself to the chariot.
Yeah. These books are hard to read, guys.
Oh, I like the imagery at the end.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. He does a beautiful job of creating imagery. I think I like reading Kropotkin, and I probably read Mutual Aid on my own. I read the first half. I didn't finish. Because I started this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to keep it smaller books, because if I'm going to do this every week, I want to, like, State and Revolution's 103 pages. I can do that in a week, easy.
There you go.
But, like, I'm not trying to read, like, what was it? Luxembourg wrote, like, a 400-page book. Or, like, Das Kapital. If we do, it's going to be, like, a 4-part series, right?
I got Das Kapital for beginners, actually. I haven't read it yet, unfortunately, but I was like, I'm not reading all that. I'm just going to get the tome that, like, breaks it down Barney style for me. And if I'm ever smart enough or, like, have the desire to, I'll read it all.
Hold on. Let me grab some of my books. I'll be right back.
Do it up. To answer, so I did not create the K-Popkin. That was Marcus. I do not take credit for that. He did that. And it's epic. I did teach. I will say this. I said this on stream yesterday. I taught Marcus how to meme. I taught myself how to meme, but then I taught Marcus, and I honestly think he won't cop to this because he's being fucking modest. But I think the student has become the teacher at this point. Like he's pretty damn good. Although I did create a great video earlier that I call the Coper.
Yeah, it was funny.
Dubbed over the Kenneth Copeland cackling video.
So these are my Rosa books, right? Actually, I have 4. So these are all my Rosa books. So I'm probably going to read Reform or Revolution by Rosa. It's a little thick, but I might do it in a couple weeks. And then Russian Revolution, or the Russian Revolution, Leninism or Marxism.
Mm.
I'm going to read some Lenin. The next one is State and Revolution, but this one is also Imperialism, the Highest State of Capitalism, which is a fun one. And then Accumulation of Capital. Probably not going to read for you guys. I'm going to read on my own. And then the letters of things. That's what she said. The letters of Rosa Luxemburg.
Nice.
Yeah.
Damn.
That's just a few of the ones I have. I think, these are all good ones to just read on your own. Maybe I'll do Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, just because we are a vet group, and I think that's a very important topic.
Yeah. At our core, we are anti-imperialists, right? That's our claim to fame.
And I really wish you had been there the first week, because he goes in depth on the military-industrial complex in this book. Kropotkin does.
In the first half, shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna have to. You know what I'm gonna do? This is a good time to tease this out, actually, because we are releasing the audio from these eps behind the paywall on Patreon, patreon.com/leftflankfets. Actually, I'm gonna do the bot so you guys can sub if you want. So if you ever just want to listen to us talk on here, or Lorax with Marcus or myself or whatever guest he has on, talk about it while you're doing the dishes and stuff, maybe soak it in and not be as like I actually concentrate better when I'm doing like a manual task and listen to something. But yeah, you can listen to the audio of these behind the paywall. And so what I will do is listen to the ep from last week, which we haven't put up yet.
I'm putting it up today.
Behind the paywall.
Yeah, I should be putting it up today. I've never added anything to Patreon, so bear with me.
It's really easy, actually.
Yeah. Just upload the audio, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's got some simple options there. Just make sure you choose it for patrons only. And it's only $5 a month too. So it's only one tier. We're not going to like ask you to pay $20 to, have a special, get a job at the dick sucking factory to work beside me and Lorax.
Hey, can you let me in on my phone?
Oh, yes. I got you. But yeah, subscribe to the Patreon, listen to the audios. And also, of course, subscribe on here to get access to the Tier 1 Twitch emotes. You get Rosa Luxemburgs. You get fucking Mr. Chappie. We're working on a Jeepgate one, for all our Jeepers out there. Our Jeepanons.
Our Jeeper Creepers.
Our Jeeper Creepers.
That's what we're going to call you, too. That's what your status is going to be.
The Jeeper Creepers.
Yes.
Hashtag Jeepgate. Jeepgate ain't going away.
I mean, if you aren't reading theory too, like just read some good organizing tools. Like, just want to show off some of these books. Some of my recommended reading: Guns, Germs, and Steel, Beautiful Trouble, Drug War Capitalism. What is the Open Veins of Latin America? Is a really fucking good book. Of course, I have like multiple Communist manifestos, but like this is the one I read week 1 for left populism. Of course, some Machiavelli and some Chomsky, but bell hooks.
Oh hell yeah!
That's Angela Davis down there. It's Kissinger and Cyprus. These are all just things you can read on your own that'll help you get a grasp on like certain ideologies and shit.
Yes, you don't have to read theory to be a leftist, but it helps.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely helps.
Conway Realty
says, have you read History of America in 10 Strikes?
No, but I've been meaning to. Oh, no, what was the other one? There was one similar that was written. It's pretty popular among the left that I forgot.
I Fight for Them suggests Immanuel Wallerstein's Core Periphery Theory of Economics. That sounds fucking impenetrable, dude.
Nope. I'm going to go ahead and pass on that. I'm sorry. That sounds awful. I mean, it's like reading Das Kapital. Like, just don't do it. Fuck that. Like, it's a hard book to read. There's like 3 volumes.
Tufaru says, honestly, the Black Panther-like book lists are pretty fucking fire.
Oh, hell yeah. I'd be down for that. I'd really actually be down with that. One thing I want to do with this is start bringing more like international, like women, people of color, by POC into the fold of like leftist theory. Not just like old white guys with beards,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we are... Luckily, only one half, you and I, of Left Flank is middle-aged white dudes with beards.
Yes.
Luckily, we have Marcus and Erica to set us straight. But then they cancel each other out because they just do misogyny and racism at each other all day. So
Yes, it's actually quite fun to watch. And Marcus is usually on the show, but I mean, Dick, if you want to come back every now and then with Marcus, like I would love to have the whole crew here for this. This would be fun. So people can be like, I am confused by this statement. Please explain.
No, I mean I like learning from you guys by watching, and I'd love to be on. Like honestly, the reason that like I've been like it's probably better to only have one person on with you because we do have a tendency to interrupt each other, and
Hmm.
I wouldn't want to ruin your leftist theory by doing bits the whole time. So I have to bite my tongue just sitting here with just me. But if me and Marcus are riffing off of each other, you're gonna be like, "Shut the fuck up! How am I gonna get through this book?"
Bits are good. But I do want to thank everyone for coming out today. It's increasing viewership. I know some of you are just left over from election shit, and we can absolutely talk more about that too.
Oh hell yeah! Um, but that is our time for today. But what we're going to do is we're going to send you over to Lions Led by Donkeys. Our friend Joe Kasabian is playing Persona 4 right now. He's dope. He's a leftist veteran just like us. He's been on the stream. We love him. He has a great podcast. That's the name of the channel. So we're going to raid him with you guys. Go over here, give Joe some shit, and make sure you Jeep gate the fuck out of him. He will, if he doesn't
Yes.
get it, it'll be funny anyways. All right?
No, he'll love the Jeep Gate stuff. I promise.
He will. He's. I think he's on to it already. So.
Oh, also, if you guys want us to do this like at a later time, just because if it's hard to watch during the day on a Sunday, because I know everyone's just doing shit, like I'd be cool with that too, and maybe the evening. I think Marcus would be okay with that too.
Yeah.
Not sure. Just let us know. I mean, if you want to be here every week and like be able to see this, it's up to you guys really when I do this because I'm pretty free on Sundays. So
Yeah. Hop in the Discord and let us know. All right.
yeah.
Peace out, gang. Have a good one. War is a racket. And we're clear.
Okay.
They
Are we? Are we clear?